Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Encore. This legend comes from Brittany in France. Perhaps the best comparison for this one is that of the Grim Reaper. The Encore is said to resemble the Grim Reaper, wearing a black coat that covers his face. He also carries a scythe that strikes fear into the hearts of all who see him. Now, unlike the Grim Reaper though, the Encore is not tasked with mortals whose time has come. His job is to guard the souls of the graveyard, to collect the ones that have been lost, and to bring them to his realm. No one living has ever seen his face, for to do so would mean certain death. His eye sockets are like smouldering ashes glowing with an eerie light. His eyes were removed many years ago by an angel who was angry when the Encore attempted to rip the soul from a good untainted man. He is said to drive a black cart or hearse pulled by two horses. Some say it is the souls he harvests that end up working for him, loading his carts with bodies so that he can remove their souls later. If you hear his knock, a death in the family will come within just 1 year. If a person finds a red mark outside their door, it's a sign of an approaching illness. This became known as the mark of death. Perhaps the scariest aspect of the Encore is that there is always room for one or more bodies in his cart. Some say he has never stopped harvesting souls, and he will continue to do so forever. Next up at number 9 now, we have the Dame Blanches. Those of you who know a little bit of French might know this translates to the White Ladies. These mythical beings have been mentioned all over France, and the best description I've heard of them is that they're beautiful trolls. Not because they look like trolls, but because they are said to live under bridges. They wait for young men who need to cross. They love to dance and will crawl out from below the bridge to try and dance with the men. They are charming, and usually the men agree. If a man does, they will dance, and then he will be allowed to pass without any problems. The men who refuse though will be thrown off the bridge to their death. Many people believe this was the key to their success. The survivors would always tell other people about the lovely women in white at the bridge who wanted to dance with them. The ones who knew their true terror would be dead and washed down the river. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Tarasque. When you think of dragons, many people would jump to China, but France has its very own. The Tarasque is a fearsome dragon-like creature that has been mentioned in southern France for generations. In medieval times, it was said to devastate the land. Those who lived to tell the tale said it was a dragon with a lion's head, 6 short legs like a bear's, an ox-like body covered with a turtle shell, and a scaly tail that ended in a scorpion stinger. They say it has teeth like swords and as big as horns. Sounds pretty horrible, right? Well, the people of southern France certainly thought so. Legend says the creature would hide in the river and attack passers-by after sinking their vessels. The King of Nerlux was said to have attacked one with knights and catapults. The creature was almost impossible to kill. Saint Martha charmed the beast with hymns and prayers and led it back to the city. The terrified people attacked it as it slept, and the creature did not fight back, ultimately dying right there. The townspeople felt so bad that they renamed the city Tarascon in the creature's honor, a place that you can still visit today. Just keep one eye open as you sleep. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the Kidney Thieves. The story goes like this. A man in Paris once had too much to drink, and when he stumbled into his home, he forgot to lock his door. The next morning, he woke up naked in his bathtub, which was filled with ice. Next to the tub, he found his phone and a note that read, "Call an ambulance right away and don't move." There was also a bottle of champagne in the ice and a national health insurance reimbursement form stapled to the note. The man panicked but had no choice than to follow what the note said. He called the ambulance, which took him to the hospital. The doctors were shocked to find that someone had surgically removed one of his kidneys. He used the medical form to claim the money back in medical fees and got 30,000 euros. Many people in France have spread this scary story of organ thieves who are sometimes willing to pay a fair price, but they'll always take what they want by force. Next up at number 6 now, we have the Vanishing Hotel. The story goes like this. 2 couples were driving through France on their way to Spain. To break up the journey, they decided to stay for the night in Montelimar in France. The hotel was full, and so they set out to find a new place to stay. They stumbled across a street with old-fashioned buildings and advertisements for a local circus. They found a hotel with some vacancies and decided to stay there for the night. They were surprised to find the hotel had no elevators or telephones. Every door had wooden catches on rather than locks. There were bolsters instead of pillows on the bed. The plumbing was very old-fashioned but seemed somehow new. Their bed sheets were made of calico, a cheap looking fabric that hasn't been used to make linen for centuries. The windows were even worse. They didn't have any glass, just shutters. Despite the strangeness of this hotel, they stayed the night. Next morning at breakfast, they saw a few people enter the hotel. A woman in a long old-fashioned dress with button boots. Then there were 2 French policemen wearing old uniforms. The hotel bill was very cheap, less than 10% of what they were expecting to pay. Nonetheless, they enjoyed their stay and decided to return to the hotel on their way back from Spain 2 weeks later. This time though, they couldn't find it anywhere. The cobbled road and the old-fashioned circus signs were still there, but the hotel was gone. It had disappeared. When they went to develop their holiday photos, all the ones they had taken of the hotel were missing. They weren't even just blanks either. The photos physically didn't exist anymore. It was like the hotel had never existed at all. These details have been verified by a number of historians, but nobody has ever been able to offer an explanation for this mysterious time slip. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Matagot. In southern France, people say the Matagot is an animal spirit. The interesting thing about this creature is that it takes the form of any animal it chooses. It's often a black cat, but can also be a rat, fox, dog, or even a cow. They are generally evil, but can sometimes bring wealth into a home if it's well fed. Traditionally, a wealth-bringing Matagot must be lured with a fresh chicken. The new owner must then carry it home without looking back once. If the cat is given the first mouthful of food and drink at every meal, it will repay its owner with a solid gold coin each morning. However, there is a catch. Nobody can keep a Matagot forever. They say if the owner is dying, they will suffer a long and painful death if they do not free the Matagot. Next up at number 4 now, we have the Gargoyle. The story goes that this creature was a terrible sea serpent who emerged one day in the Seine River and began to spew water about the countryside. It created a giant tidal wave, and whatever the waters did not kill, the dragon himself devoured for its meal. Its name literally means gargler for this reason. One day, the Archbishop of Rouen intended to put a stop to the problem. He knew the creature lived in a cavernous lair on the banks of the Seine River, and he intended to travel there to stop it from rampaging anymore. Nobody wanted to help him though. They said it was a mission. Instead, he took with him 2 prisoners who were already condemned to death. When they got there, the beast attacked them ferociously. However, the Archbishop made the sign of the cross with his fingers, and then the dragon fell docile. They then bound the dragon by its neck and led it back to the town. There, the people condemned it to die by fire because it had so many with water. Fire raged for days until an enormous pile of ash was left behind. They cast the pile into the river from where the beast has originally come from. Ever since then, the drains that divert the rainwater from the roof of the local church building have been decorated with images of the monster as a reminder of what the people suffered through. Next up at number 3 now, we have the Beast of Gavaudan. This fearsome creature is not steeped in the mists of time from thousands of years ago. It's fairly recent and well documented, which perhaps makes it even more unnerving. The beast was described as a sort of werewolf, half man, half beast that preyed on people in the 18th century. The first report of it came in 1764. A young woman was tending to her livestock when the creature attacked her. It made several attempts before being driven away by her own cattle. She testified that the creature was a large, wolf-like thing with reddish fur, small ears, a dog-like head, and a long tail. At the time, people thought this was just a one-off event, but they were wrong. Just a few days later, a girl was by the beast not far from the first sighting. Her body had disappeared, presumably devoured whole. Now it was serious. The villagers began to panic and the attacks got more brutal. There were several reports that people's heads were just being snapped clean off by the beast. The legend grew so big that even the King of France himself heard about it. No matter how many hunters he sent, the attacks kept happening. In the end, in 1767, 300 hunters finally tracked down the beast, which required a silver bullet to be killed. Some say they got it wrong though, and that this was just a large wolf, and the real beast or its offspring may still roam the hills of France. Moving on to number 2 now, we have Les Lavandières. This legend has been spoken of in northern France for centuries. The name translates to the midnight washerwomen. They are said to be 3 old laundresses in Celtic mythology. The old women go to the water's edge at midnight to wash the clothes of those who are about to die. Those who see them say they're small, dressed all in green, and have webbed feet. This also led to them being called the night ducks. They are a terrifying omen of death to all who have seen them. It can mean a death in the family or the death of the person that actually sees them. Now, despite their appearance, the washerwomen are said to be very agile and strong, almost supernaturally so. In other Celtic countries, if you can get between the women and the water, they will ask you 3 questions which you must answer honestly. If you do, you'll be given 3 wishes. However, due to their ominous relationship with death, many people will turn and run at the first sight of them. And finally, at number 1 now, we have the faux follet. You guys may have heard this called by other names in English, such as the will-o'-the-wisp or the jack-o'-lantern. It's some sort of atmospheric ghost light which appears in shades of faint blue. Other times it can be yellow, red or green in appearance. It appears suspended in the air, sometimes flickering, and often appears just briefly at night above cemeteries, swamps or bogs. Aside from its ghostly light, faux follets are generally harmless. However, beware, as these wisps wisps are said to be spirits of the dead or supernatural beings. If you try and follow them, they will lead you to your death, and perhaps you too will become a wisp. Starting off at number 10 now, we have the loup cassol. This urban legend originates from the Gascony region of France. The loup cassol is said to be a disgusting, grotesque creature that wanders the countryside of southern France. It's described as half snake, half snail. Its massive and long body carries an enormous shell on its back. Its hideous mouth is surrounded by several long, hairy and slime-covered tentacles that can extend for not inches or feet, but for miles. Yes, you heard me right, miles. They send these tentacles stretching out from the caves they live in. They wait for people to accidentally touch one, and then bang! They grab hold of you and drag you right down underground, where they swallow you whole with their huge mouths. Next up at number 9 now, we have meat pies. In the 15th century, the story goes that a barber and a cook made a deal in Paris. The barber would slit the throats of his clients, who were mainly poor college students. He would then chop up their bodies and send them through a trapdoor to a cook straight to his kitchen. The cook would then use the human meat to make his pies and sell them to the public. There were many different flavors and sizes to reflect the diversity of his supply. Business grew for both of them, and the bakery became known as one of the city's most well-known patisseries. Nobody was wise to what was going on, at least no human. You see, one day a German student called Alaric was visiting the barber. His dog sensed that something wasn't right and began barking at the neighbors. When people came to investigate, they found the cellar full of tools used to hack apart the corpses. The two men confessed to their heinous crimes and were burnt alive in iron cages. Moving on to number 8 now, we have the peluda. This creature has been a feared part of French folklore for generations. Its name means hairy or shaggy beast, but to be honest, it's a whole lot more than that. They are said to have stingers like a porcupine, the head and neck of a snake, tortoise feet, and a serpent tail. Their breath withers crops. They can fire their quills like arrows, spit acid out of their tails, and if they attack you, you're doomed. They are said to be invulnerable all over their body except for their tail. With their huge size, people say they could create floods simply by stepping on rivers. Some people believe that the peluda was one of the animals that was not saved by Noah and his ark in the Bible. However, it still managed to survive the great flood by hiding in caves. Afterwards, it went on a rampage across the world, killing everything that got to board the ark instead. Some people say it still continues this today, even if they're only left in France. Next up at number 7 now, we have the Château de Tresesson. This is a medieval castle in the Brittany region of France. From the outside, it's an impressive looking building, attracting tourists from all over the world, but don't be fooled by its outward charm. The chateau is famous for its terrifying ghost stories. One night many years ago, a black coach stopped near the moat and 2 men got out. They used shovels and picks to dig a deep grave in silence. From the coach, they dragged a young woman dressed as a bride, her face as pale as her dress. She didn't cry or beg for mercy as her executioners laid her in her grave and covered her with dirt. The men then rode off into the darkness. A local man saw the whole thing from the trees and gathered the other villagers to help. They dug her up and tried to save her, but by sunrise she had died without ever saying a word. They never knew who she was or why those men her, but it wasn't the last time people saw her. In the centuries since then, locals have sworn they see her ghost floating on the waters of the moat near where she died, still in her wedding dress and still deathly silent. Next up at number 6 now, we have the catacombs. This is perhaps one of the most famous and creepy parts of Paris. They are a series of tunnels that wind underneath the city. They are said to hold the remains of some 6 million people there. They were first started in the late 18th century to help deal with the city's overflowing cemeteries. A sign at the entrance reads, "Stop. This is the Empire of the Dead." 800 meters of the walkways are just lined entirely with bones. Over the years, locals have shared many stories of dark goings on there among the bones, legends of Masonic cult meetings, black masses, Nazi gatherings, gang fights, and serial. Coming at number 5 now, we have the wooden leg. In the Château de Combourgy, there is a ghost with a wooden leg. It's said to be the ghost of Comte de Combourg. He was a general who lived there 300 years ago and lost his leg in battle, having it replaced by a wooden one. In life, his leg was said to send echoes around the castle so that everyone knew where he was. After he died though, that never went away. In the years since, many visitors have said they've heard his leg thumping around the castle in the night. Some even say they've seen it walking up and down the stairs by itself. no body attached to it, accompanied only by a mysterious black cat. Moving on to number 4 now, we have a strange concert. On June 2nd, 1925, a 24-year-old medical student named John Romier was studying in a garden in Paris. An elderly man approached him dressed in a strange riding coat. The two men began to talk about classical music, and eventually the old man invited John to come and listen to his concert that he was putting on with some friends on Friday. John accepted and asked for his name and address. His name was Alphonse Barrière, and he gave him his address, 3rd floor on the left. Next Friday, John arrived at the given address and was welcomed in, where he met Alphonse's whole family. They were lovely to him, but John couldn't quite shake this strange feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the old-fashioned apartment with its outdated decor and gas lighting. The musicians sat down and performed some classical music, including Mozart. John stayed for a few hours after and talked to Alphonse about music. He thanked him and then he left. Out in the street, he realized he had left his lighter inside. He went up and rang the bell, but there was no answer. He kept trying until a neighbor came out and asked what the problem was. John said he was trying to see Alphonse, but the neighbor said, "I think you're mistaken. Alphonse has been for 20 years and that apartment has been empty since then." John told him that this was impossible. He had just spent a whole night with him and his family. The neighbor started to become suspicious of John and accused him of being a thief. The police unlocked the apartment and took John inside along with the owner of the place, who was actually Alphonse's great-great-great-great-grandson. They walked through the apartment, which was now empty. When they got to the back room, they found a side table covered in dust. There, sitting on top, was John's lighter. Some say that John experienced a real-life time slip. Others refuse to believe this happened at all. Either way, there's an official police report out there that contains this whole story, and many people believe it's still unsolved. At number 3 now, we have the Tuileries Phantom. This is another story involving a man called Jean. He worked as a butcher near the Tuileries Palace in Paris during the reign of Catherine de Medici in the 16th century. She ordered Jean to be killed because he had threatened to reveal many of the royal family's secrets. Just before he was executed, he told his executioner that he would rise from the dead. The executioner left Jean's corpse in the garden. He then went to tell Catherine the deed had been done. When he returned to the garden to dispose of the body, he found Jean's corpse missing. A few days later, the Queen's astrologist reported having a vision. In it, he claimed he saw all of the inhabitants of the palace die a horrible death, and that Jean would haunt the palace until it was destroyed. Not long after that, the executioner was on his way to the palace when he looked behind him and froze in horror. There stood Jean, drenched in blood, as if he was still alive, thus beginning the legend of the Red Man. He is said to have haunted the grounds ever since. People believe that if you come across John, the Little Red Man, that means a terrible tragedy will follow shortly. Next up at number 2 now, we have the Devil's Door of Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a very famous cathedral in Paris. Many visitors notice its elegant side doors with their intricate iron patterns. They were designed by an artist called Biscornet. His talents were known throughout France. The doors were considered a masterpiece, taking months to complete in Biscornet's workshop. Parisians were so impressed that some of them began to doubt that he did it alone. This was the 1300s, an age of deep superstition in Europe. Some people believe that Biscornet had sold his soul to the devil in exchange for this masterpiece. Locals said they had been to his studio during his work hours, where they had found him unconscious on the floor next to the finished piece, which had been mysteriously completed in record time. When they came to first use the door on the cathedral, the priest claimed that they could only get it to work after sprinkling it with holy water. Biscornet soon after, and in the years since, many experts have struggled to explain how exactly he made this with the basic tools of his time. Some people also point to his name. B means two or twice, while cornet means horn. Put it together and you have the two-horned man. And finally at number 1 now, we have the Chateau de Brissac. This old French castle in the Loire Valley was first built in the 11th century. It's been almost 1,000 years since then, and its walls have seen some grisly deaths and hauntings. Perhaps the most famous is the story of Charlotte. She was the wife of Jacques de Brezé, the lord of the castle in the 1400s. One night he came home after a hunt and had dinner with Charlotte. Then they went to bed in their separate rooms. The marriage was said to be for political reasons, not love. That night he was woken by his servant, who said Charlotte had another man in his room, and and it was one of his hunting partners. He flew into a rage, grabbed his sword and attacked both of them, slashing and hacking away. By the time they were dead, their bodies had almost 100 wounds inflicted. Charlotte was actually the half-sister of King Louis VI. He stripped Jacques of all of his titles and took possession of his castle. As for Charlotte, well, people say she never left. Her traumatic made her a ghost, cursed to haunt the castle forever. They say at night on the walls of the castle you can see a female ghost in a green dress with bloody, gaping holes all over her body. She is silent except for when she returns to the room where she was, where deathly moans and cries can be heard until dawn. Starting off at number 10 now, we have The Little Blue One. This is a story of Castillo di Montebello. On June 1st, 1375, the 5-year-old daughter of Lord Ugali Nuccio da Montebello was playing inside the house. Her name was Gwendolania. She was an albino who wasn't allowed out in the sun in case it damaged her skin. Her blue hair and blue eyes made everyone call her the Little Blue One. Now on this day, her father went upstairs to check on her and asked where the little girl was, but she was nowhere to be found. She had run after her cloth ball into the sprawling dark dungeon, never to be found again. Now locals believe her ghost still roams the castle, and that on summer solstice every 5 years, the Little Blue One calls out into the night. Next up at number 9 now, we have Pier Zanfretta. From 1978 to 1981, this Italian security guard was the victim of not 1, not 2, 3 or 4, but 5 separate alien abduction cases that took place in Genoa. After each time, he was regressed hypnotically and even voluntarily took truth serum in order to give a detailed and true account of the events. The abductions would always involve a group of aliens known as the Dragos, who were from the planet Zetonia. The first time, Zanfretta claimed to have seen 4 lights moving around in the garden of the house that he was commissioned to guard at that time. Suddenly, the engine, radio and lights of his vehicle all went out at the same time. He then saw 4 lights moving around the garden and presumed it was thieves come to rob the property. He crept through the gate, and just as he was about to confront the trespassers, he felt something touch his shoulder. He spun around quickly, and in his own words, he described what he saw as an enormous, green, ugly and frightful creature with undulating skin, as though he were very fat or dressed in a loose grey tunic, no less than 10 feet tall. In later interviews, he would also describe the creatures as hairy, with points on the side of their faces, round fingertips and monstrous yellow triangular eyes. As I said in the beginning, this encounter was not the last one that he had. It would go on to become the stuff of legend in Italy and for the paranormal community worldwide. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Mouth of Truth. In the Paleo-Christian church of Santa Maria in Rome lies a statue called the Mouth of Truth. It was built by the Romans during the classical period and represents a river god with an open mouth, wide eyes and a flowing mane of hair. Legend says that if a liar puts their hand in that statue's mouth and says a lie, they will lose their hand, just get bitten right off. The story goes that a rich wife of a Roman noble was accused of adultery. She denied the accusations, but her husband wanted to put her to the test, so he told her to put her hand inside the statue's mouth and say it. The wife had thought ahead of time though. She knew this was going to happen, and so, in front of the crowd at the statue, the man who was her secret lover embraced and kissed her. She then pretended that she didn't know him, accused him of being a madman, and the crowd chased him away. When she put her hand into the mouth, she declared that she had never kissed anyone except her husband and that madman who had just kissed her. Her hand was saved, but those who still suspected her believed that the hand must have lost its power. Many people still believe in its powers though, risking their entire hands to see if the legend still remains. Next up at number 7 now, we have The Crushing. The Sedele Anime is a house in Genoa that has been linked to a number of disappearances over the years. Some say that many years ago it served as an inn for travellers on the road between Lombardy and Piedmont. According to the story, the innkeeper there would always warmly greet travellers. He would give them hearty drinks, and then, when tiredness overcame them, he would suggest that they sleep in a particularly secluded room in the inn. Once the travellers would fall asleep, the ceiling would slowly begin to descend. By the time they woke up, they were being crushed against the ceiling. Once the travellers were dead, the innkeeper would dispose of their remains and gather whatever belongings they had to sell. For many years, the these evil claims were dismissed, but they re-emerged when a bag of bones dating back to the 19th century were found near the house. Despite the creepy past, the house is still inhabited today, with supernatural occurrences happening on a regular basis. Next up at number 6 now, we have the Monastero Santa Radegonda. This old monastery in Milan sticks in the mind of anyone who visits it. It's a place that's not only known for its ghostly sightings, but also its ghostly sounds, specifically screams of torment. The story goes that in the late 14th century, Bernarda, daughter of Barnabo Visconti, was locked in the Rocchetta di Porta Nuova. How am I doing with the pronunciations, by the way, in this video? I feel bad for my editor. You guys don't have to see how many attempts this is taking me. I scripted that because I know it's true. Anyway, Bernarda, the daughter, was locked away because she was accused of adultery, a claim which even her father believed. Her confinement took its toll on her and she began to fade away, dying just a few months after being locked up. Now, they say her spirit roams the haunted church nearby. Many say they have seen her. Some even say they hear her anguished screams in the night, echoes of the pain she felt in the last pitiful months of her life. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Beautiful Woman. There's an old legend surrounding the Villa di Corigliano near Pisa. You may recognize the name Pisa from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. If you ever intend on going there, perhaps stop by this place before you leave. According to the legend, the house is home to the ghost of Teresa della Celta Bocca Gaetini. In life, she was a beautiful woman from an ancient Pisan family. She was married to Count Cosimo Baldassare Agostini in 1755. They say that something bound her spirit not just to this mortal plane but to the very house itself. Those familiar with the house have reported seeing her move noble tapestries and ornaments or slamming doors and windows. On nights with a full moon, the lady has been known to appear on the avenue of the grounds driving a spectral horse-drawn cart. The current owners say that although she's been sighted outside of the house, that doesn't mean any peace for them, as they themselves claim to have heard her laughing in the cellar. Next up at number 4 now, we have Devil's Monk Monastery. This monastery can be found in Salerno. Legend says that a desperate wanderer once stopped by the entrance of the monastery asking for help one day. The monks did so, and the wanderer wanted to help repay them by working for them. He stayed with them for a long time and decided to become a monk himself. He was happy for a while, but eventually he fell in love with a local woman. The other monks claimed that she was a witch and warned him that she was a temptation sent by the devil. They her to try and extract a confession. She never did though, and eventually died. Due to the loss of his love, the wanderer lost his mind and vowed to take revenge on the monks and the locals. People started disappearing around the town. One day a couple arrived at the monastery asking for help, just like the wanderer did all those years ago. The woman was never seen again and the man was found with a broken skull. The wanderer was the one who welcomed them in. When the king learned what was happening, he sent soldiers to capture the madman. They the demonic monk, and locals say his evil presence can still be felt in a monastery today. Coming at number 3 now, we have the mummies of Ferentilo. Below the church of Santo Stefano in Ferentilo lie buried bodies that have been preserved for a long time. Normally when I talk about preserved bodies in a video like this, it's due to humans using an embalming technique, usually for religious reasons. These bodies though were preserved by a rare microfungus that attacked corpses and turned them into mummies. Some of the mummies still have beards, teeth and hair. Among the dead are elderly people, a Napoleonic soldier, a victim, a mother with her and even 2 Chinese lover pilgrims who died during their travels around Italy. Despite the preservation being explained by natural causes, some say this place is very much unnatural and that the preservation is a sign of an aura that exists below the church, one which people like to avoid, especially if they hear whispers down there at night. Moving on to number 2 now, we have Ospedale Montecatone. This hospital was designed by famous fascist Mussolini in 1930. It was initially a hospital that specialized in the treatment of tuberculosis. Try as they might, they couldn't save everyone. Locals began to believe that the old hospital was filling up with the spirits of those who had died there. As the hospital aged and its capabilities waned, a wing of the hospital was abandoned out of necessity. Naturally, this place has now become a hotspot for paranormal investigators from all over the world. Some ghost hunting teams have already explored the remains of the hospital and claim to have seen a little girl running down the hallways. They say this is one of the tuberculosis victims that we talked about earlier. Along with the sightings, the hospital has also been talked about in conversations about why it hasn't been renovated yet. Some people believe the authorities know more about its aura than they are letting on. And finally, number 1 now, we have Villa Clara. This villa in Ferrara is often held up as perhaps the creepiest and most haunted place in Italy. The first thing people notice when visiting is that because of its location and unique positioning, it's almost always shrouded in darkness and a natural fog, even on the brightest of days. This alone is enough to stop some locals from even walking past the house. But there's more. One story says that a girl called Clara was buried alive in the house by her own father. Nobody alive today knows the exact reason. Some say she was a clairvoyant and that her powers scared her father so much that he decided to end her life. Some people feel compelled to visit Villa Clara, knowing there is a small chance they will hear Clara herself crying out for help across the ages. Starting off at number 10 now, we have the house that kills. Along the Venice canals there are expensive houses that are snapped up whenever they go on the market, all except for one. Its name is Dario, sometimes called the house that kills. It was built in the late 15th century for Giovanni Dario, Secretary of the Venetian Republic Senate. When he died, the house was inherited by his daughter and her husband. After a while, the husband lost all of his possessions and was stabbed to death, while the daughter killed herself by drowning in the canal. They had a little boy who ended up being killed by assassins. The Venetians were shocked by the 3 violent and started to think the house was cursed as it was built on an ancient cemetery. Others said it might be the inscription on the floor, which read Giovanni Dario in honor of the city genius. In Italian, that's actually an anagram of who will live in this house will be ruined. In the 19th century, a descendant of the family sold it to a rich diamond merchant who quickly lost all of his wealth and died shortly after. The next owner died mysteriously in the house with his lover, perhaps in a case. Death seemed to follow every owner thereafter. There was a then a car crash, then a another car crash, and then a again, and then a heart attack. After all of that, it's no surprise that locals are now convinced that the Casa Dario is a cursed house. Even those who don't believe in curses have stayed well clear of the house that kills. Here's a little modern one for you guys now at number 9 with water blades. A number of years ago in northern Italy, a panic began to spread about a man known only as Water Blades. He was said to be an evil genius psychopath who would visit water parks attended by children. When nobody was looking, he would install blades in the water slides on the park. On some of them he would leave tiny small blades that would just cut the people who rode them, but that was just a test. He would then build up to bigger and bigger blades, putting them in places to cause maximum damage to the riders. Legend says that people were left horribly disfigured for life after slashing themselves on these rides. According to the story, the knives were always found, but never Water Blades himself. Some people are glad that this is now a thing of the past, but for others the damage is already done. People have been scarred for life, and now everyone kind of lives in fear of when Water Blades will return to leave a knife on a whole new ride for people who never saw it coming. Moving on to number 8 now, we have the Casa del Anime. This house in Voltri, Genoa has a reputation as one of the most haunted houses in Italy. Many years ago it was run as an inn by a family who all suffered from severe mental disorders. Legend says they would invite passing guests to stay for the night, sometimes even for free. This was all just a tactic though to get them inside. Once they were asleep in their beds, the family would murder them, take their money, and then throw their bodies into a mass grave. They say the souls of the victim are now bound to the house and roam around it during the night, making unearthly noises. For many years after this family's time there, the house lied empty. No doubt the stories had something to do with it. A new family finally moved in after the Second World War, and they witnessed a very creepy event. They said they always saw a young girl walking around the house dressed all in white, asking if anyone had seen her love. Locals believe the girl was engaged to one of the victims, and after he never returned to her, she went to look for him. Now she is doomed to wander around that house looking for her lost love forever. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the Museum of Purgatory in Rome. In a small church in Rome lies a single room known as the Museum of Souls. For those of you who don't know, Catholics believe purgatory is the place between heaven and hell where souls are trapped before they can advance to heaven. The chapel is known as a place where people will go and pray for their loved ones to advance to a happy afterlife. However, things have got creepy over the years, with recorded instances of trapped souls souls who have appeared to visitors and personally asked them for help. At first it was just eyewitness accounts, but then physical things started happening. There have been photos showing apparitions behind, and perhaps most creepy of all, handprints burned onto the pages of prayer books. If you were trying to get to heaven and avoid hell, perhaps you'd make yourself known just as much. At number 6 now, guys, we have the Witches of Monte Matana. We're heading to Tuscany for this story, and it may either repel or attract you, depending on what kind of person you are. This is a mountain in the Italian Alps which offers hiking by day and witch hunting by night. For centuries, local legends say the area was a retreat for witches to perform their human sacrifices and occult rituals. They say the only reason anyone even knew that they were there was because shepherds would sometimes see flames and bright streaks of fire upon the mountainside. Today you can see a strange shaped rock that they are thought to have used as a table, not in the table sense that you or I know, more of a sacrificial table. Why did the witches return to this location? Well, again, local legend says they hid all of their wealth and treasure there before moving on to another life. Now people go searching for the witches' treasure. However, there is a problem for any witch/treasure hunters out there. It's guarded by something, apparently. A ghostly spectre holding a huge scythe, exactly like the Grim Reaper. If you find the treasure and manage to avoid getting scythed by a witch's ghost, I guess it's all yours. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Poveglia Island. Just off the coast of Venice, you can find Poveglia Island, a place that many locals will never go near. Back in 1348, it was used as a quarantine colony for people who were caught the plague, known as the Black Death. People were sent there to die, with no hopes of being cured. Some believe that so many people were burned and buried there that the soil on the island is now made up of about 50% human ashes. By the 1800s, the island was being used as a mental asylum where people were locked up, rarely helped, and often died in anguish. They say that the psychiatrist who ran the mental hospital was a butcher and who tormented the patients for many years. Eventually he went mad from all the guilt and threw himself from the island's bell tower. He survived the fall, but his body lay broken on the rocks. That's when witnesses say he was strangled to by a ghostly mist that emerged from the ground. Some say this was the island itself, now intertwined with the dark energy of death and taking its revenge. It's no surprise that boats stay clear of Poveglia Island and visitors are few and far between. Moving on to number 4 now, we have Broglio Castle. In Broglio there is a castle that has belonged to the Ricasoli family since 1141. It was owned by Bettino Ricasoli until 1880 when he died of a heart attack in the castle. His body was not buried right away though, but kept near the altar of the crypt in the family chapel. During that time, rumours began to circulate about strange apparitions around the castle. People caught glimpses of spirits walking about the castle as if they were still alive. None of this had happened before Bettino had died. The wind began to blow harder than it ever did for that time of year, opening and slamming windows violently. A swarm of moths invaded the chapel, forcing many of the mourners to flee. However, this was all building up to one single moment. When they tried to lift the coffin up again, it was too heavy. More people came, and more, but it just wouldn't budge an inch. It was like the whole thing was full of rocks. Suspecting demonic forces at hand, they fetched the local priest. He arrived and placed his hand on the coffin, muttering words in Latin for a while. When he had finished, to everyone's amazement, the coffin was suddenly light again. The priest claimed that all of the damned souls in the area had seen the coffin as a safe place to hide and had come from miles around to do so. He had dispelled them from the coffin, but unleashed them on Broglio Castle. In the years since then, the souls are said to still wander the grounds there, ready to torment any visitors who disturb them. Next up at number 2 now, we have Villa Magnoni. This is an ominous looking house located in the otherwise picturesque Italian countryside near the city of Kona. These days the house is almost entirely boarded up, which has led many people to believe the whole place is haunted. One of the only stories that has survived over the years comes from the 1980s. Back then, a group of friends reportedly visited the house and heard children singing in the garden. Great, they thought, I guess the place isn't haunted after all. When they went round to the garden though, the laughing stopped as soon as they turned the corner. There was nobody there. Then they looked up to the house and scanned the windows. They were all either empty or boarded up, except for one of them at the very top. In that window they saw a woman. She was wearing all white, her eyes wide open, and she was screaming at them. She screamed so loud they could actually hear what she was saying. She was telling them to leave. Leave now. The friends ran in fear and then sped away in their car. They actually crashed on the way home, killing 3 out of 4 of them. Months later, the survivor returned to the house to investigate. He searched inside the house and went up to the window where they saw the woman originally. He froze on the spot. The room from which she appeared had no floor. And finally, number 1 now, we have the ghost of Palazzo Vecchio. In the old city of Florence lies this luxury villa. There once lived a man there called Baldaccio. He was a medieval nobleman and brave warrior who was ultimately betrayed, wrongly accused of treason, and killed inside the palace in 1441. He was stabbed and thrown out of a window, probably on the orders of a rival nobleman. Now his spirit remains in the palace, filled with rage at the people who killed him. In the centuries since then, locals have learned that there's a set of rules to not anger the ghost of Baldaccio. After dark, you should not scream his name, you should not name him without a reason, and you must always speak with respect in a low, hushed tone. The most famous sighting of Baldaccio happened in 2001 when he appeared in the background of a wedding picture taken. Experts said the photo had not been tampered with, only adding to the legend of the angry ghost.
Coming in at number 10, we have Die Grischet von Beißen Frederik. Our next story translates to either cruel or wicked Frederick. I think it depends on what era you're born in, but this story is pretty much about a sociopath in the making. The story starts with cruel Frederick running around eating birds, just random birds that he finds. He finds them and he kills them and he rips their wings off. And this isn't even to eat them, he just wants to kill them for his own sick pleasure.
No, you need help. I need help?
Who does that? And the story only gets worse from there. He starts to destroy furniture, and then he finds some poor lady named Mary and he starts whipping her. First of all, what is wrong with this kid? And second of all, why on earth does this kid have a whip? Who gives a kid a whip? Then there's a dog that shows up at this kid's house and he starts whipping the dog. And then the dog gets pissed and it mauls cruel Frederick's leg. And then the story ends with him in bed because his foot is infected and the dog is sitting at the dinner table eating his food. So I guess the moral of the story is don't be an evil child of Satan or you'll get attacked by wild animals and maybe starve to death. Next on the list we have Struwwelpeter. This story translates to Shaggy Peter. And while being shaggy now in this day and age with ripped jeans and face tattoos is hip and cool, back when this story was written in 1845, they didn't feel the same way. Well, maybe that was just Germany. I don't know if there's a bunch of people running around with face tattoos in the 1800s in New England, who knows. But this story is about a boy who gets too damn shaggy. He never wants to groom himself, he has fingernails that grow super long and his hair needs to be brushed, but it's also so long because he never cuts it. Also, the story specifically talks about how he's covered in soot. I don't really think that's a problem anymore. I think the equivalent to being covered in soot is like being covered in Cheeto dust. The modern version of this story should be Cheeto Dust Charlie and the sticky fingers that ruined his Xbox controller. Someone in the comments please tell me how to say that in German. But pretty much what happens to old Shaggy Peter is that no one likes him. He stinks, he's hairy, he's got fingernails so long he could scratch his next door neighbor's ear holes. So the moral of the old tale is be clean or people won't like you. In 1845, we hadn't started telling kids that it's what's on the inside that counts.
You're ugly.
Coming in at number 8, we have Fidgety Phillips. This story is a warning to kids who can't sit still at the dinner table. The story goes that young Philip is at the dinner table with his parents and is being pretty rambunctious. Eventually, after moving around way too much, he ends up tipping his chair over. In his fall, he ends up bringing the entire dinner table and everything on it down with him and makes a complete mess. He is under the tablecloth with all of the dinner scraps over top and all around him. His parents are of course extremely upset at him for ruining all their plates and glasses and the dinner that they had made for everyone. The boy ended up not getting to eat dinner and had to go hungry that day. If you take anything from this story, just make sure you're minding your manners at the dinner table. Moving on to our number 7 spot, we have the story of Augustus who wouldn't have any soup. This story is about a boy named Augustus who was a healthy little boy with round cheeks. Augustus never had a problem eating and also ate whatever he was told to and never let his soup get cold. But one winter day, something changed in Augustus. When his soup was placed in front of him that day, he threw a tantrum and refused to eat it. He threw his spoon across the room and yelled to get that nasty soup away from him. The next day he was visibly thinner from not getting his nutrients, but he still refused to eat his soup. The next day the same thing, and the days that followed. He was withering away in front of everyone's eyes. On the fourth day he was so thin he hardly outweighed a sugar plum. The story takes a dark turn on the fifth day when he ends up being found.
At number 6 we have Die Grieche von Fliegenden Robert. This one is the story of Flying Robert. He goes out during a rainy day and he has his umbrella and he ends up floating away. And the last line of the story is literally, he was never seen again. The moral of the story is to tell kids not to go outside when it's gross and rainy outside, but how harsh does the story have to be? The kid couldn't just come home with a cold and get a little sick and then get better. No, he had to float away from the wind, picking him up by his umbrella, and then he would vanish from society. Jesus.
In our number 5 spot, we have the Girl Without Hands story. This story is about a father who gets offered money by a strange man. The man tells the father that if he gives him whatever is standing behind the mill, then he will give him the money. Unbeknownst to the father, this strange man is actually the devil. The man agrees because he believes that there is only an apple tree standing behind the mill, but to his unfortunate surprise, his daughter was actually standing behind it. When the devil goes to take the daughter away, she fights back. She is so pure that she is able to resist his grip, but the devil still wants to take something with him. He tells the father and daughter that he will leave if the father will chop off his daughter's hands to give to him. Of course, at first they said absolutely not, but then the devil threatened to take the father away if they didn't agree. So unfortunately, that father and daughter had no choice and were forced to chop off her hands. I definitely don't want to go to sleep after hearing that one. In our number 3 spot, we have Max and Moritz. This story is about 2 little rascals who like to pull pranks. In the story, they pull off 7 different pranks. Some of their pranks include stealing a widow's chicken, breaking a bridge and then making the tailor walk over it so that he falls into the river below, and filling a teacher's pipe with gunpowder so that when he lights it, it blows up in his face. Needless to say, these boys are pretty reckless and pretty cruel. Eventually, someone decides it's time to prank the boys back, but this is where things take an even darker turn. This prank ends up being less of a prank and more of an extremely severe punishment. The boys end up getting baked into bread and fed to the chickens. I can't believe that this is actually a story told to children. The boys did play some pretty harmful pranks, but I'm not sure if this extent was necessary. I guess it's a lesson to be kind and treat others well.
At number 2 we have Die Göttore Grieche mi Frühzig. There's my German, I'm killing it. Killing it at German today. My German's the best. This translates to a very sad story with matches. And it's about a girl named Harriet who is left home alone. Her parents have a box of matches on the countertop and tell her not to touch them, but this little girl loves fire. And so the girl doesn't listen to her parents and she lights a match anyways. And then her clothes light on fire and she burns until there's nothing left but her smoldering ashes on the ground. And then her cats cry a stream of tears out of their face, and that's the end. That's the end of the story. The lesson is obviously don't play with matches, and the secret message is how you give a lifelong fear of fire.
In our number 1 spot today, we have the story of Little Suck a Thumb. This story starts off with a mom leaving her young son Conrad at home. She explains that she needs to leave for a little while, but warns him not to suck his thumb while she is away, or else. She says that the great tall tailor always finds little boys who suck their thumbs and takes big sharp scissors and cuts them off, and explains that thumbs can't grow back. The mom leaves, and then almost immediately after, the boy begins sucking his thumb. He had been warned, but absolutely did not listen. Soon, the door flew open and a tailor began running in with scissors. I'm not sure why the tailor cares so much about it, but he ends up chasing the boy around and snipping off his thumbs. When the mom comes home, she sees the boy standing there, and apparently he just looks sad. I feel like I would be a lot more than sad if somebody cut off my thumbs, but I guess it is just a story. The mom then says she knew that the tailor would come to naughty little little suck-a-thumb, which seems like kind of an insensitive response.
Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Wrestle von Konnersruth. That's a mouthful. This is a mystery surrounding Theresa Neumann, also known as the Wrestle von Konnersruth. She was born in Bavaria in 1898 and lived a life shrouded in mystery and dominated by persecution. She also built up a devout Catholic following around her who believed she was connected to God. Now, she claimed to have been able to cure herself of ailments on multiple occasions throughout her life. At the age of 27, she was said to have cured herself from appendicitis, and then later on she healed herself from blindness. Then came the stigmata. Wounds began to appear on her hands and her feet in the same places where Jesus would have been nailed to on the cross. She also claimed that from the age of 25 onwards, she did not eat or drink a thing. Investigators were skeptical and observed her over 15 days, and they found that she did not eat anything during that time. Opinion is divided on the authenticity of her claims though. Some even believe they happened but are quite fearful of her. To this day though, she still has many adoring fans who are hoping she will one day become a saint. Next up at number 9 now, we have the White Lady. This one goes back hundreds of years ago and revolves around a girl named Anna Sydow. The King of Brandenburg, Joachim II, took her as his lover despite already having 2 wives. The two lived happily in the Grunwald, an area just outside of Berlin. They also had 2 children together. Sadly, their son died at the age of 9, but their daughter grew up to be Magdalene of Brandenburg, Countess of Arnberg. When Joachim succumbed to illness, he requested that one of his sons from a previous marriage, Johann, take care of Anna. Johann did not keep his promise. He kept Anna as a prisoner in Spandau Citadel. He married off Magdalene into a forced marriage. Anna remained a prisoner in her tower until her death, locked up and mistreated with the knowledge that her daughter's life was a misery. She died with anger in her heart. Now, locals say that Anna still wanders the galleries of Spandau Citadel. Visitors report seeing the ghostly figure of a white lady roaming around, unable to leave and seemingly unaware of her surroundings. A morbid turn to this story came just a few years ago when restoration workers found bones in the citadel believed to be Anna's. They gave her a proper burial in the hopes of putting her spirit to rest, but if reports are true, it was to no avail. Next up at number 8 now, we have the Children's Crusade. This is a pretty creepy story from the 13th century. Legend says that a German boy was visited by Jesus. Jesus told him to lead a crusade of children to Jerusalem and peacefully convert Muslims to Christianity. He convinced 30,000 followers to join him and led them south towards the Mediterranean Sea. Now, he believed the sea would part for him like Moses and they would just walk along the sea floor towards Jerusalem. The sea did not part though, and the children were captured by various groups. Some of them were sold into slavery, others died in shipwrecks, others simply died from starvation or exhaustion. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Maria. Maria Renita Singer was a Bavarian nun who became famous in Germany in the early 18th century. If you're thinking she became famous for being an excellent nun, well, you come to the wrong video. She was notorious for being a witch. She became a nun in Bavaria in 1699 at the age of 19. She rose up the ranks and by 1740 she was appointed sub-prioress of her convent. In 1746, one of her nuns, Cecilia, became afflicted with convulsions and claimed to be possessed by demons and poltergeists. The attacks also started to affect other nuns too. One of them even died. At that point, people began accusing Maria of being a Satanist and a sorcerer. The Catholic Church then conducted an exorcism during which the nuns rolled on the ground and, quote, howled and snapped like mad cats. The investigators searched the convent, including Maria's room. They found poisons, ointments, and strange robes. They confronted her with the evidence and she confessed. Maria admitted that she was a Satanist and a witch. She said that at the age of 7 she swore herself to Satan. Age 12 she became a and learned magic and how to mix potions. In 1694 she was baptized at a black mass, and in 1699 she had entered the nunnery to infiltrate and corrupt them. Well, it certainly worked. She was remorseful about what she had done, but the church still found her guilty of sorcery and executed her. Next up at number 6 now, we have the Hinterkaifeck. In 1922, an entire family living at the Hinterkaifeck farm in Germany were by blows from a pickaxe. The parents, their widowed daughter, her children, and the housekeeper were all found dead. 4 of them in the barn and 2 of them in their beds. Here's a really creepy thing. The men continue to live at the farm afterwards, with the family's bodies just there for some time. Police knew this because the animals were still being fed, neighbours saw smoke coming from the chimney, and when they arrived to investigate, the dog was tied up outside the barn. It gets creepier. Before the murders, the family had reported hearing footsteps in the attic. They saw footsteps in the snow that led from the woods to the house, but not the other way, and they also found claw marks on the door of the tool shed. That's where they kept the pickaxe that was used to kill them. The crime was never solved. Next up at number 5 now we have eerily. According to German folklore, there was once a nymph that lived by the Rhine River. If you aren't familiar with what that is, nymphs are said to be mythological spirits of nature that usually take the form of a beautiful woman. Eerily lived on top of a steep rock. She was said to dress in white and wore a wreath of stars in her hair. They said that she was beautiful, but that she also sang a song so haunting and hypnotizing that no sailor could resist her aura. No one who was drawn to her ever returned to tell the tale, and instead they would be dashed against the rocks. Today a statue marks the spot where eerily has been spotted over the years. Some take it as a warning to turn back before it's too late. Moving on to number 4 now, we have the Rubsal. In German folklore, this is a mountain spirit. He's also a giant. He roams the mountains and is known for his love of trickery. He's friendly to good people and will teach them medicine and even give them presents sometimes. If someone annoys him though, they can expect a harsh trick pulled on them. The legend of Rubsal has been around for thousands of years, going right back to pagan times. They say he is the fantastic lord of weather and is similar to the legend of the wild hunt that we actually talked about in another video. He has great powers and can summon lightning and thunder, fog, rain and snow from the mountain above. Even while the sun is shining, he may take the appearance of a monk, and sometimes he holds a harp. From his slumber and emerged from under the hill. They say the ravens on the hill is a sign of his presence there, and that if they ever disappear, Barbarossa will be emerging very soon. Now some people might love that sight, others might be a bit disturbed at the sight of a 900-year-old undead king stumbling towards them. How do you feel? Starting off at number 10 now, we have the big grey man of Ben Macdui. Amphir Liath Mór is the Gaelic name of a mythical creature known as the Big Grey Man, who is said to dwell at the summit of Scotland's Ben Macdui mountain. Over the years, many climbers have felt his presence or even seen him, a lumbering giant that skulks in the thick fog of the mountain peak. He's often described as being very large, sometimes about 10 feet tall when standing completely upright. Short hairs cover his whole body, especially thick on his broad shoulders. His arms are also said to swing wildly when he's sighted. Sightings of this creature have gone back for centuries, but the first credible account came from Professor Norman Colley in 1891. The day he saw it, he made a note in his journal saying, "I was returning home from a calm on the summit in the mist when I began to think I heard something else other than my own footsteps. For every few steps I took, I heard a crunch, and then another crunch, as if someone was walking after me, but taking footsteps 3 or 4 times the length of my own." His account ends up going into much more detail, but for many people, this account and a few others are more than enough to convince them of the big grey man of Ben Macdui. Moving on to number 9 now, we have Cathedral House Hotel. This building in Glasgow was originally built in 1877 as a halfway house for prisoners who had been released from the nearby Duke Street prison. That prison was the site of many over the years, including 12 in the 20th century. The last person to be executed in Scotland, Susan Newell, was hanged at the prison in October 1923 after being found guilty of strangling a paperboy. In the years since the last execution, locals swear that the spirits of the have made their home in the nearby Cathedral House Hotel. Some say they have felt a ghostly presence brush up against them on the staircase. There have also been several reports of 2 ghostly children being heard on the top floor of the hotel and items of furniture moving of their own accord. In 2005, the Ghost Finders Scotland group conducted a thorough investigation using high-tech equipment. They recorded unusual EMF and tri-field readings along with light orbs and various other anomalies appearing on both video footage and still photographs. Moving on to number 8 now, we have the Well of the Nice name. Many Scots will be familiar with the Jacobite Rising of 1746. On April 16th of that year, the Scottish forces fighting for independence from the British were defeated, suffering heavy losses. Many lost their lives on the fields of Culloden. Legend says that birds no longer sing above the boggy land where Jacobites made their final stand. That rhymed, that wasn't intentional. Locals have witnessed a tartan-wearing spirit wandering through the moor there. Those who get close enough manage to hear it muttering one single word: defeated. Every single year on April 16th, the anniversary of the battle, they say you can still hear the clashing of swords and the sound of men dying, locked in their bloody battle for eternity. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Jenny with the Iron Teeth. So we talked about Gorbals in the last video, the Glasgow neighbourhood that's home to Glasgow's necropolis of sorts, where an estimated 50,000 people are buried. As such, it's not too surprising that the area has made it into one of our videos for a second time now, but now it's for a different reason. In 1954, a policeman responded to reports that hundreds of children had descended upon the cemetery. When he arrived, the children had begun to disperse. He questioned them and they swore that 2 children had just been devoured by the Gorbals vampire. Some of you may remember the Gorbals vampire from the last video. Well, the locals didn't believe the children, but not for the reason you might think. They claimed that had actually seen Jenny with the Iron Teeth. It had been many years since they had heard that name. She is said to be a demonic hag who roamed Glasgow Green in the 19th century, dragging into her lair with great big metal jaws. The reports made people fear that she had returned, and in the years since then, perhaps she's never left. Coming in number 6 now, we have Netta Fornario. This is perhaps one of the strangest missing person cases I've ever heard of. Netta Fornario was a member of an occult group called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They practiced ritual magic, tarot cards, mysticism, and held a solid belief in the powers of telepathy. On top of all that, Netta also had a personal interest in fairies. In 1929, Netta went to the small Scottish island of Iona. Nobody is quite sure why she did it. She arrived at a local inn and spent most of her days wandering the tiny island alone. After a few weeks, her innkeeper woke up to find that Netta was in a frenzy of packing her luggage to leave. Netta said that she needed to leave right away, as several individuals were attacking her telepathically. The innkeeper told her it would be impossible to leave that day, as the boat to the mainland did not run on Sundays. Netta left the room in a rage, returning a few hours later to say that she had decided to stay on Iona after all. She left on one of her walks that night, but when she didn't return later on, her innkeeper raised the alarm. After a 2-day search for her, they found Netta's body. A cross had been cut into the turf with a dagger, and Netta's body was lying on top of it. A doctor could not determine how or when she died. Many people believe that she was mentally ill and but others argue that she was the victim of some really dark magic. Next up at number 5 now, we have Provan Hall. Many people in Glasgow will know this as one of the oldest buildings in the city. It was built as a hunting lodge for the bishops of Glasgow in 1471. That's more than 20 years before Christopher Columbus set sail. For all you history buffs out there trying to get your head around the dates, it's a pretty old building. It has played host to some distinguished guests as well, including Mary Queen of Scots and her father, King James V. Ghosts have been reported at the hall ever since those days. Locals say they've seen spirits of and also their victims. The master bedroom is said to be haunted by a man with a dagger. They say that in the 19th century he came home from 2 years at war to find his wife had had a baby with another man. In a fit of rage, he stabbed her to and then slit his own throat. Another less violent ghost that's been seen is that of Reston Mathers. He was a previous owner of the hall who is often seen on the staircase. He died there in 1934 after breathing problems and is said to always be dressed in a black bowler hat and sporting a bright white beard. Next up at number 4 now, we have the Green Lady of Crathis Castle. Many people know of the Green Lady of Crathis Castle, a forlorn spirit that has been seen by an alarming amount of people over the years. The castle was built in the 16th century, and despite its grand size, the Green Lady is only ever seen in one room. She paces back and forth in front of the fireplace there, sometimes cradling an infant in her arms. Apparently, even Queen Victoria herself saw the spectre while staying in the castle one night. Some say that in life the apparition was a servant girl who fell pregnant out of wedlock and mysteriously disappeared soon after. For a while, this was just dismissed as nonsense, but in the 1800s, a grisly discovery was made. While renovating a fireplace, some workmen uncovered the skeletal remains of a woman and child. Even that story has now been lost in the sands of time, but the legend of the Green Lady lives on. And finally, at number 1 now, we have the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Mystery. These isles are a group of uninhabited rocks off the coast of mainland Scotland. One of the islands is called Eileen Moor and features a grass hill at its highest point. On top of that lies Flannan Isles Lighthouse. A year after it was built, on December 7th, 1900, the new lighthouse keepers arrived. They were Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall and James Ducat. The inspector made sure they were okay and then left. Soon after, the island became enveloped in a thick, rolling fog. The inspectors couldn't see the lighthouse from the mainland because of this fog. A ship that went by a week later reported that the lighthouse was not shining its light. After a full 3 weeks, the lighthouse had still not been seen and the men had not returned from their rotation on the island. A rescue ship found that the island was empty. The lighthouse was locked, the clock on the wall had stopped, and there was a cooked meal just sat on the table. The last entry in the log had been made almost 2 weeks before. Authorities concluded they were swept away by a storm, but locals had maintained something supernatural happened on that island and that the fog had something to do with it. Alright, next up at number 9 now guys, we have the Devils in the Bins. The House of the Bins is an old Scottish ancestral home. General Tam Dalyell was the head of the Dalyell family in the 17th century. Now while he lived there, Tam claimed that every night the devil visited him in his home for a game of cards. He said the devil usually won. Now in retrospect, this might have been a good thing. You see, one night the devil appeared as usual, and as usual the devil and Tam sat down to play cards. This night was different though. This night, for the first time ever, Tam seemed to be getting the upper hand. He was winning. As the game went on, the devil got more and more angry about this. Eventually, when the game looked lost for him, he flew into a rage. The devil then threw a single marble at Tam. It missed and instead landed in the sergeant's pond outside the house. Now for many years people laughed at Tam and dismissed his story as insane. Then, over 200 years later, the pond outside was apparently drained, and what should they find buried in the mud at the bottom but a single shiny marble?
He lost his marble! One marble. One marble? At number 8 we've got Abandoned Annie. The City Chambers is a famous building in Edinburgh, with ancient alleys that run beneath. The streets below the City Chambers are said to be haunted, and they attract psychics, ghost hunters, and mediums. This is because back in the 16th and 17th centuries, this particular area of Edinburgh was hit extremely hard by the plague. The streets used to be littered with bodies and sick people who were banished and left for dead. After the 18th century, the abandoned homes and alleys were sealed, but that doesn't stop people from venturing down there. There have been many strange noises and sightings reported, but most notably a psychic claims to have come into contact with the ghost of a young girl named Annie. Abandoned Annie is a story that began in 1992 after after a Japanese psychic called Eiko Gibo went to the close as a part of a documentary on paranormal activity. When the group were touring the area, she came across a room that she at first was too afraid to enter. She said the room had a terrible feeling of sickness, hunger, and cold. But then Eiko went inside the room because she said she was invited by the ghost of a little girl named Annie, who had died of the plague. Annie grabbed her hand and said that she had been abandoned by her family and that she had lost her doll. Eiko later went back to the room with a Barbie for Annie to play with, and since then, visitors to Annie's room are told to bring a gift for her. There is now a pile of toys created by people who have visited her room. To this day, people report feeling sick, uneasy, and cold while visiting Annie's room, despite the fact that there is no historical record of any girl named Annie, and the story has been dismissed as a popular urban myth. An urban myth that actually has a happy purpose, apparently. Along with toys, people leave money for Annie, and at the end of every year, the money is counted and given to the sick kids' hospital. So far, Annie has raised more than £45,000 for other sick children.
Next up at number 7 now guys, we have the A75. Now that is the name of what's said to be the most haunted road in Scotland bar none. It runs through the county of Dumfriesshire and has been a hub of reports of supernatural activity over the years. It's actually attracted paranormal investigators to it from all over the world. Kathleen Crone is the founder of Mostly Ghostly, great name by the way. Now she said there have been screaming hags, eyeless phantoms, and a menagerie of unearthly creatures witnessed on this famous road. In 1962, perhaps one of the most famous sightings occurred on the road. Derek and Norman Ferguson were driving along the road when a large hen apparently flew into the windscreen of their car. They then saw huge cats and other monstrous creatures pass by them, as well as a phantom furniture van, whatever that is, all of which vanished into thin air. In the years since then, the number of stories has grown to the point where some truck drivers actually avoid the A75 altogether.
Alright, it is time for number 6, the Boneless. The true story of the Boneless comes from the Shetland Islands, a group of small islands off the coast of Scotland, where the inhabitants were once terrorized by a ghostly blob. Yes, you heard that correctly. Stories about a ghostly apparition called the Boneless, and sometimes a frightening, have been whispered on the Shetland Island for years now. It's based on an account found in the book Shetland Traditional Lore by Jesse Saxby. Although no one could describe the apparition properly, people called it the Boneless because witnesses say it looked like a giant glowing white blob. Others said it looked like a jellyfish or a slimy white cloud. The Boneless would appear pressed up against windows and it never made a sound. It could move though. Apparently it could move faster than a dog. If you had happened to find yourself face to face with the Boneless, you would cower in fear and often die of fright. There's a story about one boy who was dragged by the Boneless to the edge of the cliff. He described it as smelling like rotting flesh. As he heard the waves crashing below, he grabbed the rocks and hung on for life. The Boneless rolled off the cliff and disappeared, and the boy managed to drag himself back to his home to tell his parents. Next at number 5, we've got the haunting of Castle Stewart. The story goes like this. The Earl of Moray inherited Castle Stewart from his father. He wanted to rent it out, but he couldn't because the castle had such a bad reputation for being haunted. So the Earth tried to improve the castle's reputation by offering a reward to any man who was brave enough to spend the night in the castle. News about the reward spread, and eventually 4 men agreed. A minister, an elder in the Presbyterian church, a local shoemaker, and the last was a large man named Rob Angus. The deal was each of the men had to spend an entire night alone in a haunted room. Once they were inside, the door would be locked and wouldn't be unlocked until the next morning. The minister fell asleep in the room and had a dream about a blood-splattered man who sat down next to him. When he woke up, no one was there. The elder had a similar experience. While he was reading his Bible, the door to the room sprang open, and in walked a man covered in blood. The man drew his dagger on the elder, who fainted. He was found the next morning in complete shock. When it was the shoemaker's turn, he heard the door to the room open. A tall man with hooves for feet appeared in the doorway. The being jumped at the shoemaker and he fainted in terror. He was found unconscious on the floor the next morning. And lastly, it was Rob Angus's turn. Rob Angus was a big, strong Scotsman who said he wasn't afraid of anything. As the servant closed the door to his room, he said, "You will find me as I am, or dead." When the servant returned in the morning, the furniture in the room was broken and all over the place, but there was no sign of Rob. But then, the servant looked out the window and saw Rob Angus lying on the ground. At some point, Rob Angus fell out of the window or was pushed. Various sightings and reports of paranormal activity over the years have given Castle Stewart the reputation of being one of the most haunted castles in the world.
Coming at number 4 now guys, we have Arthur's Seat Coffin. Coming at number 4 now guys, we have the Arthur's Seat Coffins. This one comes from Edinburgh. Arthur's Seat is a rocky hill there, sort of a landmark if you will. One day in 1836, 5 local boys discovered an entrance to a small cave on the rugged northeastern face of that famous hill. There, they found some intricately carved miniature figures set in coffins. I know, that's incredibly creepy. The 17 coffins had actually been left undisturbed for an unknown amount of time. Each casket contained expertly carved human effigies, creepily dressed in very unique clothing. They had painted black boots on and twisted facial expressions. In the years since then, these creepy coffins have defied all attempts to explain them. This has opened the door to a number of creepy urban legends surrounding them. The most popular is that they were created to commemorate the 17 victims of the notorious Edinburgh and grave robbers Burke and Hare. I'm no relation to that Burke though. Okay, maybe somewhere along the line. Awkward.
Getting close now. At number 3 we've got Sawney Bean, Scotland's most famous. Not much is known about Sawney Bean, but he was said to have been born in the late 15th century. He married a woman who was said to be a witch and moved to Benane Cave in Ayrshire with his new wife. Sawney supported his wife by being a robber, but rather than risk being caught, Sawney his victims and disposed of the evidence by eating the remains. The couple started having children, a lot of them, 14 to be exact, and fed them a high protein diet of human flesh. Eventually the children grew up and had their own children born of, and before long the cave was inhabited by an entire extended family of 48, all with a taste for humans. Eventually King James of Scotland heard about the Sawneys and orchestrated a 400-men manhunt. They found the cave full of human remains and stolen valuables. Sawney Bean was reportedly for the mass murder of over 1,000 people, but most historians believe that Sawney never existed, and his story was nothing more than an urban legend.
Moving on to number 2 now, we have Gilly Doo. I think I'm pronouncing that right. In Scottish legend, he's a solitary Scottish male fairy that lives alone in the forest. He disguises himself in trees so as not to be seen by humans. His light green skin and long branch arms make it almost impossible for people to spot him. However, it's important to note that the Gilly Doo is usually only this elusive to adults. You see, he's been known to appear and interact with friendly children. Now you should know that doesn't mean that every interaction is a good one. He has been known to prey on people lost in the woods or enslaving them. Perhaps the strangest thing I read about this creature is that he is said to collect the teeth of to perform protective magic on them. This has led some people to believe that the Gilly Doo actually gave birth to the legend of the Tooth Fairy, a much lighter story. I think we can all agree. I don't think the Tooth Fairy has killed or enslaved anyone. If you know otherwise, let me know. And finally, number 1 now, we have the Mackenzie Poltergeist. This is perhaps the most famous ghost story in all of Scotland. The Black Mausoleum is the name of a tomb in Edinburgh's Greyfriars Cemetery and has become famous as the home of an evil paranormal entity. Over the years, visitors have reported feeling extreme hot spots and cold spots. They leave with cuts, bruises and burns on their body. Photographic evidence for the legend includes pictures of these injuries as well as pictures from inside the tomb that some claim show an unidentified shape. Others have reported seeing a white figure in the dark, smelling strange odours and hearing knocking noises under the ground and even from inside the tomb itself. If that wasn't enough for you, locals have gone to the grave some days to find dead animals in front of the Black Mausoleum. Some people have even claimed to have been possessed, which led to the grounds being exorcised twice, both unsuccessfully apparently. In the past few decades, it seems as though the Mackenzie Poltergeist has begun to spread. Poltergeist activity has been reported in 4 different houses around the graveyard, and in 2002 a large fire broke out in the residences behind George Mackenzie's tomb.